I knew the company was heading for a digital cliff the moment Gavin walked in wearing a vest that cost more than my first car, smelling like sandalwood and unearned confidence. He didn't look at the server racks. He looked at the reflection of his own teeth in the glass partition. To a man like Gavin, infrastructure wasn't a foundation. It was just plumbing, unsexy, invisible, and annoying whenever it cost money. I was standing by the cooling units, the hum of the fans drowning out his introductory speech about disruptive synergy to the marketing team. But I could feel the shift in the air pressure. It wasn't the weather. It was the sudden drop in IQ in the executive wing. I'm Susan. For 8 years, I'd been the senior backend oversight lead for a SaaS company that handled data sensitive enough to make a frantic lawyer sweat through a wool suit. My job wasn't to code flashy features that made buttons explode with confetti. My job was to make sure that when 10 million people logged in at once, the digital floor didn't collapse into a basement full of 404 errors. I was the janitor of the internet, the mechanic who tells you that, no, you cannot put a jet engine on a Honda Civic just because it looks cool. But Gavin was all jet engine. By the way, if you enjoy watching corporate train wrecks unfold in slow motion while sipping your morning coffee, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Maybe leave a like, too. It helps the algorithm find more people who appreciate the fine art of professional disaster. And honestly, it keeps me motivated to type this out instead of throwing my laptop into the Hudson River. Thanks. The trouble started small, like it always does. It wasn't an explosion. It was a series of skipped maintenance tickets. Gavin's first executive order was to trim the fat in the engineering department. In his mind, fat meant anyone who wasn't shipping new features every 48 hours. He looked at my team, the people handling database sharding, load balancing, and compliance encryption, and saw dead weight. We were the no department. He wanted a yes department. Susan, he said during our first one-on-one, leaning back in a chair ergonomically designed for people who actually do work, I feel like your team is stuck in 2018. We need velocity. We need to move fast and break things. If we break things, Gavin, I said flatly, gripping my coffee mug like it was a holy relic, our clients lose financial records. We aren't Facebook. We're holding the digital wallets of half the Fortune 500. If we break things, we get sued into the Stone Age. He blinked slowly, the kind of blank, cow-like blink of a man who hears words without processing meaning. Right, compliance. But let's automate the compliance, yeah. I'm bringing in some consultants. High-energy guys. Worked with me at my last startup. They're gonna help you loosen up the pipes. Loosen up the pipes is executive tech speak for remove the safety valves so the sewage flows faster. A cold knot formed in my stomach. It was a specific feeling, one I hadn't felt since the great outage of 2016. The kind of premonition that sounds like a pager beeping at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning. The consultants arrived a week later. They were clones of Gavin, wearing tighter pants and carrying MacBooks covered in stickers from crypto exchanges that had already gone bankrupt. They didn't ask for documentation. They didn't ask for system architecture maps. They just asked for root access. Can't give you root access until you pass security clearance, I told them. Gavin said we have carte blanche, one of them replied with a smirk. His name was probably Tyler, or Skylar, or something else that rhymed with failure. Gavin can say the moon is made of cheese, I said, but until IT clears you, your guests. I walked away feeling their eyes drilling into my back. I knew I'd just painted a target on myself. I was the friction, the legacy mindset. That night, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a call. An automated alert from the primary database cluster. High latency. Packet loss. Something was chewing through bandwidth. I logged in from my home office, a quiet room in Brooklyn that smelled like old books and lemon polish, and saw it immediately. Someone had deployed a new microservice directly into production without staging it first. It was some social feature nobody had asked for, and it was querying the entire user database every 3 seconds. It was sloppy, dangerous, and it carried Gavin's authorization override code. I killed the process, rolled back the deployment, saved the system from a cascading failure that would have wiped out service across the entire East Coast. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from excitement, but from rage. They were playing with live grenades inside a munitions depot. The next morning, Gavin walked into the stand-up meeting grinning. Great work on the new social deployment, guys. We saw a massive spike in activity last night. The spike was the servers screaming for mercy, I said, cutting through the applause. I had to roll it back. It was crashing the load balancers. It wasn't optimized. The room went silent. Gavin's smile stayed exactly where it was, but his eyes went cold, the look of a predator realizing the prey has teeth. Susan, he said patiently, dripping condescension, you have to stop focusing on problems. We're celebrating wins here. Maybe if you spent less time rolling things back and more time leaning in, we'd be further along. That was the moment the uneasy truce ended. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was an obstacle, and Gavin was the kind of man who didn't go around obstacles. He ran them over. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't a speed bump. I was a spike strip. And I was already taking screenshots. The freeze-out didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, like being locked in a walk-in freezer while someone quietly lowered the temperature 1 degree every hour. You don't realize you're hypothermic until you can't move your fingers. It started with the calendar invites. For 8 years, I'd been a mandatory attendee at the Architecture Review Board, the Tuesday morning mass where we confessed our technical sins and prayed to the gods of uptime. 2 weeks after the rollback incident, I logged in and found my Tuesday morning completely open. No meeting. I messaged the project manager, Janet, a nervous woman who survived corporate life by blending into beige wallpaper. Hey Janet, was the ARB cancelled this week? Oh, hi Susan, she replied. Then came the agonizing ellipsis. No, Gavin restructured it. It's called the Innovation Sprint now. He said it's for ideation leads only. Didn't want to waste your time since you handle the legacy stuff. Legacy stuff. That was the new label. I wasn't the senior backend oversight lead anymore. I was the curator of a museum nobody wanted to visit. Later that morning, I walked past the glass conference room. Gavin was literally standing on the mahogany table, drawing chaotic circles on the whiteboard while the consultants nodded like disciples at a tech cult revival. My senior engineers, the people who actually understood the codebase, were nowhere in sight. Instead, the room was full of junior developers and product managers who thought scalability was just a buzzword for investor decks. They looked like they were planning a frat party, not a production deployment. Then came the physical displacement. Susan, great news. HR messaged me on Slack. We're redesigning the floor plan to encourage organic collisions and cross-pollination. We're moving your desk closer to the server room so you can be near the hardware you love so much. Translation. We're moving you to the dark corner beside the noisy AC intake and the bathroom where nobody will see you. I packed my things, ergonomic chair, dual monitors, neatly organized documentation, and relocated to the Siberia of the office. It was darker back there. The air felt stale, but from my new corner, I had a direct line of sight to the main network patch panel. Poetic, really. They pushed me into the shadows, forgetting that the shadows are where you see everything. Gavin stopped making eye contact in the hallways. Whenever we passed, he suddenly became fascinated by his phone, typing furiously at absolutely nothing. The emails started next. Passive-aggressive masterpieces copied to the entire leadership team. Subject. Speed bumps. I've noticed some drag on deployment velocity. We seem to be getting hung up on outdated risk assessment protocols. We need to trust our talent. I'm authorizing a streamlined approval process. Let's not allow naysayers to hold us back. He never mentioned me by name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew who naysayer was. He was isolating me, painting me as the bitter old guard who hated innovation, turning company culture against competence. I sat in my dark corner and watched the metrics. The new streamlined process meant skipped code reviews. Error rates crept upward. 0.5% more failed logins. 1.2% more database timeouts. Tiny numbers to a CEO. But to me, they were cracks forming in the dam. I started eating lunch alone at my desk. Before, I used to sit with the other leads. Now, being seen with me had become a political liability. I watched people I'd mentored, people I'd hired, avoid eye contact when I entered the break room. I didn't blame them. Mortgage payments don't care about loyalty. But isolation gave me something valuable. Time, focus. Since they weren't inviting me to meetings anymore, I didn't have to sit through Gavin ranting about I'd driven synergies. I had 8 uninterrupted hours a day to dig. So I started auditing the third-party integrations his pet consultants were pushing through. One afternoon, I found a monthly invoice for a cloud optimization tool costing $40,000 a month. I'd never heard of it. I dug deeper. The vendor company had been created 3 months earlier. Registered address, a Delaware P.O. Box. CEO, a guy named Chadwick, who just happened to appear in half of Gavin's old fraternity photos on Facebook. I printed the invoice and slipped it into my bag. I didn't go to our HR works for the company. And right now, the company was Gavin. Susan, I looked up. Jason, a junior developer, stood there pale as paper, clutching his laptop like it was an active bomb. I think I messed up, he whispered, glancing around to make sure nobody saw him talking to the office pariah. Gavin told me to push the new payment gateway API. Said we didn't need regression testing because it was low risk. But the transaction logs are looking weird. I motioned for him to sit. Show me. He opened the logs. My blood went cold. The new gateway was dropping encryption headers on 5% of transactions. This wasn't just a bug. It was a catastrophic security leak. Credit card numbers were briefly passing through in plain text. Fix it, I said quietly. Roll it back. Now. But Gavin said. I don't care what Gavin said. If this leaks, we go to prison. Do you look good in orange, Jason? He shook his head immediately. Then roll it back. I'll take the heat. He did. The error logs stabilized almost instantly. 10 minutes later, Gavin stormed out of his office red-faced, the consultants trailing behind him like hyenas. Did you authorize a rollback on the payment gateway? He demanded loud enough for the entire floor to hear. Yes, I said without standing up. I kept typing. That was a strategic deployment. You are undermining my authority. That deployment was leaking credit card data, I replied, finally turning toward him. I saved us from a class action lawsuit. He sneered. You're paranoid. It was a glitch. You're reacting to ghosts because you're scared of the future. Then he leaned in closer, smelling like mints and aggression. You're on thin ice, Susan. Very thin. Next time you touch my deployments, you won't just be moved to the corner. You'll be moved to the street. He spun around and walked away. The office stayed silent. I turned back to my monitor. My hands weren't shaking. I opened a terminal window. MKDIR, home, Susan, hidden logs. Chmod 700, home, Susan, hidden logs. If he wanted a war, he was going to get one. But he'd never see the soldiers. My soldiers were lines of code. And they were already marching. The atmosphere in the office shifted from anxious to toxic. It felt like walking through electrified fog made of nervous sweat. The rollback incident hadn't just angered Gavin. It had embarrassed him. And men like Gavin treat embarrassment like a mortal wound that can only be healed by destroying the witness. I knew a setup was coming. If you work in corporate America long enough, you learn the rhythm of a hit job. They rarely fire you directly. Severance packages and unemployment hearings cost money. No, they want you to quit. Or they want cause. They need a catastrophe they can pin to your chest like a scarlet letter. It arrived on a Thursday. Thursday is the coward's favorite day for disaster. It gives them Friday to spin the narrative and the weekend to let the outrage cool off. Gavin called an emergency product sync. Naturally, I wasn't invited. But the office walls were glass, and sound travels through AC ducts if you know where to listen. They were launching the AI customer assistant at 2 p.m. I knew the code behind that assistant. I'd reviewed the early pull requests before my access got throttled. It was a rushed wrapper around a generic language model with absolutely no safeguards for database query limits. Basically, if a customer asked the bot to show me all my transactions for the last 10 years, it would try to retrieve everything instantly. For every customer, I checked the infrastructure dashboard. The servers were already running at 75% capacity because of the unoptimized social features Gavin had forced through last month. At 1:55 p.m., I sent an email to Gavin, CCing the CTO, currently on sabbatical in Bali and probably ignoring his inbox, along with the head of legal. Subject: Urgent warning AI deployment. Gavin, based on previous load testing, the current infrastructure cannot handle the projected query volume of the AI assistant without caching. We risk a total backend lockup. I strongly recommend delaying deployment until we scale the read replicas. I hit send. That email was my paper shield. At exactly 2 p.m., Gavin pressed the button. I saw him do it. He high-fived Chad the consultant while someone popped a bottle of champagne. At 2:03 p.m., the dashboard turned yellow. At 2:05 p.m., it turned red. At 2:06 p.m., the silence shattered beneath the machine gun sound of Slack notifications flooding in. Not the polite little ding. The sound of 1,000 users screaming through error reports. 502 bad gateway. The site was down. Hard down. I sat on my hands. That was the hardest part. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to open a terminal, kill the pods, reroute the traffic, save the system. But I couldn't. If I touched it, it would become my outage. Son, GV and came sprinting toward my corner. No swagger anymore. No polished executive confidence. He was sweating. The site is down. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Gavin. I'm sitting here. You touched the load balancers. I saw your email. You tried to block the deployment, and now you've sabotaged it. He was actually screaming, building Tay narrative in real time. He needed a villain, and I was standing right there. Gavin, the database is locked. The AI bot is basically DDoSing our own internal network. You need to kill the bot. No, the bot is critical to Q3 strategy. Fix the database. Scale it. Do your job. I can't scale a database being hammered by a million queries a second. Kill the bot. I am not killing the feature. You're incompetent. Fix it, or you're done. Then he stormed back into the war room. I looked at the support queue exploding across my screen. Clients couldn't access payroll, couldn't export tax data. This wasn't just inconvenient anymore. Companies were losing millions by the minute. I had a choice. Let it burn and prove him wrong. Or save the company and let him blame me anyway. I sighed. I am a professional. I couldn't let the clients burn. So I bypassed the standard controls and logged directly into the AWS console using a backdoor admin key I'd kept for emergencies, one Gavin didn't even know existed. I didn't kill the bot. He would have checked for that. Instead, I throttled its bandwidth down to 1%. The outside world, the AI assistant would just seem slow. Thoughtful, even, but internally, the database query rate dropped instantly. The dashboard shifted from red, to yellow, to green. The site came back online. 5 minutes later, Gavin walked out of the war room looking triumphant.